Police are warning of a new toxic drug.
A drug that can kill within seconds.
Emergency rooms are seeing more overdoses than ever before.
Do you know where it comes from?
No, this is a new brand.
They're searching rooftops with helicopters and abandoned buildings on foot for people who may have taken the drug.
I have never seen, up to that point in my career, this type of crisis.
Officials worried it is a new synthetic super drug.
My analysis concluded that it was fentanyl.
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 Fentanyl. Fentanyl.
So, where's it coming from?
47-year-old George Marquardt is the alleged kingpin.
Marquardt really was a real live Walter White.
Josh didn't seem like the type.
He was the genius, the chemist, the mad scientist.
He figured out a simple process to flood the United States with all the fentanyl in the world.
Fentanyl came onto the scene because of George Marquardt.
It's scary to think that something like that could happen right here.
He never expressed remorse, never said he was sorry, because he wasn't.
If I did not know that every bit of it was true, I probably would not believe it myself.
This is the true story of the deadliest clandestine chemist in American history and the birth of the street fentanyl epidemic, as told by the man who created it.
This is a product that was made for killing people.
So you feel like you were able to successfully pull that off for how long?
Many years. Many years.
I'm John Roberts, and this is the godfather of fentanyl. In 2014, George Eric Marquardt, the criminal mastermind responsible for unleashing street fentanyl, agreed to a series of exclusive interviews with former Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics agent John Mattinger.
I thought he was the most unique and interesting character ever in American crime. The guy who's killed more people than all of the serial killers you can name put together.
Most of these interviews were recorded on audio cassette.
That machine on?
A few were recorded on video.
Most people have never heard about this case.
All are being heard and seen now for the first time.
So, you want to hear some stories?
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Mary. Our brother's name is George Eric Marquardt. We always called him Eric because our father's name was George.
Growing up in Waukesha, Wisconsin, we were a very traditional family. Just like TV shows about the 50s, you know, stay-at-home mom, dad goes to work every day. We lived in a little house on the corner. Our grandparents lived next door. As a young child, he was adorable. He had really engaging eyes. Adults were always very drawn to him because he was remarkably intelligent from an early age. He would put together electrical circuits. He would work on the doorbell at our grandparents' house. He was very, very curious.
Sometime in the early grades, I started fooling around with chemistry. I had several chemistry sets, the big models with all the thises and that's. It was the most astonishing thing. All these processes were fascinating.
His passion was chemistry. I mean, that was very clearly his passion. And so our parents, they always encouraged his curiosity. But we always knew Eric was a little different. Everybody knew Eric was a little different.
Since he was so bright, they wanted
Yes.
him to
Yes.
fit into their mold of what a bright kid should do. And
yes.
And he didn't want to.
And he didn't want to. That's about it.
The sociologists will tell us that the strongest predictor of whether someone is going to end up in prison is how well they adapt in the school.
Interest in work for which learners see a purpose provides its own discipline.
I wanted nothing to do with formal education. To me, it was someone telling me how to think. I wanted no part of that.
When Marquardt is just 13 years old, a nearby university holds a lecture that will change his life and the course of history.
It was Dr. Oppenheimer of the Manhattan Project. It was open to anybody that could attend.
We live in a very unusual world, marked by great and irreversible changes.
I was very deeply impressed by that. After the lecture, he opens it up to questions, and we ended up with quite a conversation going. Turned into sitting in the back of a chemistry department at 2 o'clock in the morning with Julius Robert fucking Oppenheimer. That's a conversation you don't forget. That night, I decided, whatever the decisions in my life, right or wrong, I'm going to make them myself. And was very determined to do so.
When he got to high school, the school did not have the facilities or the expertise sometimes to deal with the things he wanted to know. So they sent him to colleges in the area for some classes.
The professor over at this college took me over to the library and showed me how to methodically search the literature of chemistry, the way a professional chemist does. That may have been the most important thing that ever happened to me.
There's a saying that seeking knowledge is like opening doors. There are many doors to choose from. And soon, 14-year-old Marquardt will use his newfound knowledge to open an exceptionally dark one.
Oddly, Eric had very unusual friendships with, like, our father's doctor.
The doctor, one of his jobs was coroner, and he had the key to Rest Haven. It's a giant building across the street from our house, very, very close. At that time, it was abandoned.
What Eric told me later is that the doctor had him making heroin using codeine that was laying around in the morgue there. I mean, he was just a kid, 14 years old, and somebody's taking advantage of him and asking him to make heroin.
At the time, I wasn't really familiar with heroin. I made it outside of the fact that I had a vague awareness that people got themselves in trouble with stuff like this.
It may seem unbelievable, but there are some people who twist their minds on purpose with substances that are swallowed or smoked or even injected into the bloodstream.
I had a lot of fun making this stuff. When I was isolating the salts, I got quite euphoric.
A person who starts using heroin gets a pleasant feeling of well-being for a while.
I guess you could describe it as if you wanted to feel this way all the time, you could really be feeling quite good. I mean, it was have no worries, have no cares. Well, I realized people that are addicted, that was what they sought. And I took note of that, and I thought, yeah, I guess I'm doing things right. Got a yield of something approaching 3 ounces, and he kept that. Of course, I knew no one that could sell any such thing. I didn't meet those kind of people until later.
I think the reason he got into making drugs was because he was asked to. Eric was just basically flattered that this doctor thought he was bright enough to make him illegal drugs.
A few years later, they expelled him from high school for non-attendance.
My parents wanted me to work very hard in school and get very good grades and be a doctor or a lawyer or an engine chief, and I wasn't interested. A lot of bad feeling got generated. I started to pull these illegal acts more and more. You know, I'm individualistic by nature, but individualism has become a dirty word, synonymous with sociopath. That leads to the thought, well, a sociopath? Oh, you think I'm a sociopath? Okay, I'll be your sociopath.
He never took drugs because it disconnected him from his head, and he kind of liked what was in his head.
But our parents never told us what was going on with him making drugs.
Until one day some comment came up, and so at that point Mom had to tell us that he was in jail.
April 1965, that was my first arrest. I went to the University of Wisconsin. I found the chem department stockroom and robbed it.
More and more young people are using LSD. LSD certainly has a solid foothold.
As he got older, more people started asking about drugs because they were college campuses and they were the 60s.
Often disguised in innocent-looking sugar cubes, LSD can be made by anyone with a basic skill in chemistry.
There was all this talk in the air around LSD. People would ask me, well, can you make all this stuff? I said, yeah. And they were willing to pay money for it.
He needed equipment to do that, and so he would pilfer glassware from here and there. At one of the smaller colleges in Milwaukee, he was giving science lectures to some classes. He was passing himself off as a government physicist as part of a scam to get glassware.
I was a one-man epidemic, but that was the end of plunder days because it caught up with me and kept me in jail for a little while.
The last time he was actually at home for any length of time was when we were 11 or 12. It was about 1970. I think Mom always felt that we brought out the best in him because he was a good brother.
But some of the stuff he got involved with was with dubious people. Our parents pretty much told him, you can't bring the drugs and that stuff around the girls.
So there was tension between him and our parents. And at the end of that summer, we went east to a family wedding. While we were gone, he stole Daddy's car. He was about 23 years old, and he disappeared into the night. He never talked to my parents again, ever.
It broke their heart. It was hard. It was very, very hard.
It was very hard.
I saw no future for me there. I wanted an adventurous lifestyle and the freedom to pursue my own interests. I had this feeling that times were changing, and I wanted to be part of it.
The 1960s are often thought of as the drug era. But actually, it's the 1970s when drug use in the United States explodes.
America's public enemy #1 in the United States is drug abuse.
We know and can show that there are many places where drugs are openly sold.
Heroin, speed, acid, and a long list of commonly used uppers and downers are readily available.
Just as soon as you've agreed to buy a joint for $1, you can get immediate prices for the hard and often dangerous stuff.
And so, as experimentation with illicit drugs becomes more mainstream, George Eric Marquardt finds himself in the right place at the right time to capitalize on the nation's growing demand for drugs and propel himself into infamy.
I had been making LSD all over the country for a few years. But LSD is a sporadic demand. There isn't a massive repeat usage. I wanted something more reliable. A drug addict, he's got a constant need to have more. Amphetamine and more opiates. Wham, 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 wham. They just want more, 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 more. That creates a constant demand. And that was of interest to me.
In early 1975, 29-year-old Marquardt arrives in Oklahoma.
Got acquainted with the place. Decided I could live the style of life that I wanted to and do what I wanted to do.
My name is John Mattinger. I was a narcotics agent at the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. OPN was established in the summer of 1975 to investigate any drug-related crime anywhere in the state. It's funny because Oklahoma is a socially conservative state. They called it the buckle of the Bible Belt. But in the 70s, there was a lot of oil money. A lot of people came in chasing that money. This caused the problem with meth.
The consumers of this stuff were mostly people working in the oil fields, you know, and they went out there and they wanted to work 16-hour days and make a lot of money and party all weekend.
Methamphetamine was cheaper than Coke, so you had a lot of people that were buying it because they wanted that kind of high, but they were getting it from a cheaper product.
At high dosages, we often see an amphetamine psychosis. This paranoia produces a great deal of violence.
Drugs were booming in Oklahoma at that point in time, partly because we're right in the middle of the country. Oklahoma sits at the intersection of Interstate 35 and Interstate 40. So there was a lot of traffic coming through and a lot of biker activity. And a lot of the biker gangs sold drugs. I'm Elaine Dodd. I was the first Bureau of Narcotics female agent.
At the time I came to Oklahoma City, I stayed with a friend of mine who had a friend that was very interested in meeting me. That was Robert Harris. Harris approached me about the possibility of making methamphetamine. Well, I said I can do any kind of chemistry you'd pay me for. Harris told me the Pagans motorcycle gang had the money, So we were 50% partners. We got that place over on Northwest 40th. And then I went to work. The whole operation was quite successful. I guess the people Harris was selling to loved it, so I could live a comfortable lifestyle. They all said mine was the best. I would pack the stuff in Coffee Mate jars. It was perfectly white. It looked just like Coffee Mate. But I began to notice that Harris would creep in the house and go to where I stored the finished product and take some. By the way, Harris had severe drug problems. And you know how people like that are. They'll fuck you. And they'll fuck you quick. Anyway, I took off with a lady for the weekend to have some fun. And when I returned, the laboratory had been cleaned out. All the equipment had been taken. Basically, Harris felt he had learned enough from me to run the operation by himself. Got ripped off. Somebody does that to me. Some fucking fool. One way or another, whether I have to work with the other side or whether I have to work with the devil, I am going to fuck that person. So I did what I did.
In the summer of 1975, Jimmy Birdsong was one of the agents in the Oklahoma City office. He got a call from a guy he'd never heard of before, and the guy wanted to tell him about a methamphetamine lab. Turned out to be George Eric Marquardt.
We talked about this whole thing, and I'd given Jimmy all the details on Harris.
I heard the conversation went something like, I can inform on a person that's making meth, but he's making bad meth, so I'd be glad to give everything up on him.
It was like hitting the jackpot. And this is a call about a major drug lab in Oklahoma City.
They busted Harris cooking dope in his backyard. The Bureau thought that was astonishing. Jimmy, he went in there and he told me, "We're telling the truth."
Marquardt's tip results in the largest clandestine lab bust to date for the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics, and marks the beginning of his budding reputation as a notorious drug maker in his own right.
I was a prosecutor's witness at the Harris trial. I gave some pretty spectacular testimony.
It was unbelievable. He admitted all of his past crimes, was pretty proud of it actually, and bragged on how good a chemist he was and how crummy a chemist Harris was. It made a very big impression on the jury.
Harris got convicted, got his little ass nailed to the wall.
As part of his agreement to testify, Marquardt also agrees to a larger deal: immunity from any pending charges for past crimes, so long as he continues to work as an informant.
That's when I first met in person George Eric Marquardt. We met at the Bureau in Oklahoma City. First impression, he wasn't like anybody that I'd ever run across before in the drug business. He was personable, friendly, real open.
I remember when I walked in and I said, "George Marquardt?" Nobody calls me George Marquardt. "It's Squeak, you motherfucker. How are you?"
He doesn't look like a squeak. He's a big guy. He said it was a nickname that had been given to him by his grandmother when he was a little kid.
He used to sign his letters with Squeak, and he would draw a little mouse, or I guess it was a squeak rat, but I have never heard where it came from.
No.
We never called him that.
There was a rest stop we used to meet at quite a lot. And I said, I don't mind law enforcement. That's the game. And it's a game that should be played between serious players.
He was definitely the smartest criminal I ever met in 35 years of law enforcement. This is a guy who never graduated from high school. One time I sat there for 3 hours and I didn't understand a word that guy said.
Repropionyl, benzyl chloride, benzyl cyanide, manipulating the physical solvent systems of radioisotopes and nuclear technology.
The informants had to be a high caliber or they weren't really worth having as an informant. It turned out that Marquardt knew more about chemistry than trained chemists.
He got some good stuff.
People believed we were going to be making a lot of lab cases with the help of Marquardt. That was the promise.
Of course, my objectives weren't the same. I mean, people aren't what you think they are, right?
He became a legend in Oklahoma among the people who worked the drug cases. But like any good con man, Marquardt could spin a tale, and then you will have a point in time where you realize you're being sucked in.
Half the time I was their consultant, and the other half of the time I was running a drug lab someplace. Oh, what a complicated life. It was kind of nerve-wracking. I realized I had to move.
He just vanished. Just took off.
He skipped out of town and people didn't know where he was.
Everybody knew, though, that wherever he was going to be making more drugs. That was what he did.
I went up to the Pacific Northwest. They said I was at large. I started to laugh, being at large. What you mean, like I'm out here running around like a Western badass with a pistol and anything? Yeah, okay. Anyway, I was making quite a lot of dope up in Seattle.
Within a month or two of him disappearing, Warren Henderson, who was the agent up in Tulsa, was buying meth undercover from some guy who said he was getting him from the Pacific Northwest, supposedly from somebody named Squeak.
Warren realized they were dealing with me and proceeds to chase me.
People were looking for him in Seattle. I know several agents went up and looked for him, couldn't find him.
By the time he found out where I lived, I had bailed. But somehow or another, they followed me over to Spokane.
If you've seen Breaking Bad, you remember how they started off with an RV, moving around and cooking in different remote places. We started going to campgrounds and parks and make a batch or two, and then he'd move to another location.
Roll down the Columbia River Gorge, making the dope at various campgrounds.
Marquardt really was a real live Walter White.
I was probably on top of my game as a hit-and-run drug manufacturer. But oh, fuck, were they stubborn, you know.
A lot of times they got really close. People would say, yeah, we saw that guy, we smelled some weird stuff. But he's gone.
It was a rather fun way of making a living.
The thrill of the chase. It's part of the facet of every criminal. It's part of the allure as well. Hi, I'm Larry Harris, and I was Squeak Selly for 2.5 years. Anyone, no matter where they are in the pantheon of crime, that thrill of the chase, the thrill of being chased, that's all part of it. Believe me, the game is the game, and you just found the game so interesting.
Every time I got off another batch, I'd look up at the moon and the stars and it said once more, the law defeated.
After a few months, eventually OBN said, you got to come home. The whole office is out following this guy and you're in the wrong state.
The reality is, law enforcement can't spend endless time and money chasing down one clandestine chemist. But sometimes, even the most notorious criminals can't help coming back to what they know.
The agents get back to the Tulsa area, and lo and behold, Warren Henderson was watching a payphone and just happened to see George Eric Marquardt get on the telephone.
Probably not a real good thing to do in retrospect. But I had some customers in that area, and I needed to make some money.
Henderson just waited for him to get back in his truck and then followed him south down to a little town called Beggs. Beggs is about 25 miles south of Tulsa. It's about 1,100 people. It was a place you could drive by and not pay any attention to at all.
It's just a very typical Oklahoma town.
I was going to make about 20 pounds of meth over a period of several weeks and clean the operation up.
So they followed him down to a house that was set back about 100 yards from the road.
If you were to drive by that house, you would believe it was just any good Okie living their life. But knowing Marquardt, you knew there had to be a lab.
The agents now have the possibility of busting Marquardt in the act of drug manufacturing, a crime that will carry a much heftier penalty.
So we set up surveillance to be watching the house 24/7.
The smell is the first thing that hits you when you go in a meth lab. And that's why most of the labs back in those days were out in rural areas. The main chemical used for cooking meth was something called phenylacetic acid. It is one of the worst smelling things you'll ever encounter. We were trying to figure out if somebody's cooking meth. You could always get a whiff of that.
The agents decide to send 2 undercovers up to the house to see if they can smell the chemicals.
They were going to say they had car trouble and could they use the phone. The 2 agents they picked were Lonnie Wright and Elaine Dodd.
When we walked up to the house, it was exhilarating. I knew I was going to get to be a part of this major case. And I was going to get to meet the person that I'd been hearing about all this time, the infamous Marquardt.
A young lady and her associate came to the door. They needed to make a phone call. Could they use my telephone?
He said no, and we said, what's going on?
I apologized to them profusely. I would like to let them use my phone, but unfortunately I was doing something hobby-related that smelled bad.
You could smell the drugs from the porch without question. He did not let us in, but it was clearly enough to get a warrant.
Following morning, first thing, they went to execute the search warrant. Got there and knocked, and he answered the door.
He shows up at the door with a gas mask on and pulls his gas mask back. He says, well, come on in. You guys caught me red-handed. I'll show you how the lab is working, and I'll turn it off for you.
He had the attitude that it was, in a way, a game. And he took us through, proudly showing what was going on.
Basically, I gave them a guided tour of, well, this is this, and this is that. Wasn't really showing off the process or anything like that. I just didn't want any of the people handling this stuff to be injured.
To see the home decked out just like a chemistry lab was extraordinary. I was totally amazed by what we saw. Very few people have as many projects going on. That just doesn't happen with most chemists.
He had one room where he was making methamphetamine, and in the second room he was making 2,4,5-trimethoxyamphetamine. He said that the effects were very similar to methamphetamine plus LSD.
He was a real chemist. I just did one thing and one thing only, and it was fairly straightforward, whereas he was always looking for new challenges, how to make things that had never been made before.
The discovery of the Beggs lab marks a chilling turning point in Marquardt's illegal drug-making career. It is here that agents discover Marquardt has been secretly experimenting with creating totally new and powerful drugs, a pursuit he will later achieve with devastating results.
After he was arrested, he was transported to Muskogee, which is where the federal court is in Eastern District of Oklahoma.
Interview take one, Mark. My name is John Osgood. In 1978, I was an assistant United States attorney. The Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics came to me with the case involving Mr. Marquardt. He ended up pleading guilty fairly quickly, which is unusual in a case like this. When you plead guilty, there is no trial. You just give a factual basis for the crime, and then the judge would impose a sentence. At the time that Mr. Marquardt was sentenced, I had felt I got to know him a little, just from our interaction. I kind of felt sorry for the guy. I mean, he was the mad scientist, so to speak, or the genius, the chemist. And I didn't think he was that big of a threat. So I tried to tell him, maybe you ought to show a little contrition. Go in there and behave yourself, and maybe you'll do okay. And he didn't take my advice.
I went to court and went down there and told him I'd do it again.
He just told the judge he was a drug dealer. He liked what he did. He thought he was good at what he did, and he would continue to do it probably when he got out.
I told the agents in court, I will start up another operation, and I can have a good time and make lots of drugs, and you can come down and chase me around.
He made no bones about the fact that as soon as he got out of there, he was going to do it again.
And he was the first one that ever made that kind of a performance in the courtroom. I was shocked. Judge Morris gave him 10 years, strongest sentence he could get.
And that began the rest of his story.
This thing was fun before it turned wicked.
As a result of the Beggs bust, George Eric Marquardt is sent to federal prison. In a dark and ironic twist of fate, this will propel him down the road to becoming the godfather of fentanyl.
I ended up getting shipped to Lewisburg. And, you know, I know it doesn't have a particularly nice reputation. It was a very bad place if you fucked up. If you fucked up, they'd put you down in a hole for a couple of days in isolation. And you had nothing. No blankets, no sheet, no mattress, nothing. So don't fuck up.
At the time, most top-level mobsters from East Coast crime families are sent to Lewisburg. Guys like John Gotti, boss of New York's Gambino family, and Henry Hill, the gangster who inspired the movie Goodfellas, both served time here. Mafiosi are all housed in an area called J Block. This is the block where Marquardt is also assigned, meaning he is now surrounded by some of the most powerful drug trafficking kingpins in the country, the very people who will look to capitalize on his unique expertise.
I hung out with the gangsters, so, you know, because in a place like that, you're looking for good conversation. And who do I find for good conversation? Notorious criminals? You know?
Prison is an interesting experience. Some people go to prison and do their time and get out and behave themselves. But some people spend a substantial amount of their time discussing how to do more crime, better crime, and supposedly crime they're not going to get caught committing the next time when they're outside. So Marquardt was probably somewhat of a minor celebrity in prison because of the mystique surrounding his operation in Oklahoma.
They will find out what you are there for. That's just the nature of prison. You know, I was a representative of a relatively new and novel type of criminal. So I was well known in the prison population.
Everybody knew he was the real deal and was better at what he did than most of the other people who fought the good fight and lost.
Lenny Cirillo lived next door to me. He was mixed up with the heroin trade. He was one bad motherfucker. He would simply kill the people that he dealt with.
Another major figure in the ring that ran heroin between France and New York was stabbed to death last night, just hours before a team of federal prison officials arrived to conduct an investigation.
So you knew that he had the capacity to be particularly vicious. But I found the heroin trade rather interesting. One day, Lenny Cirillo took me down his cell. He was all very fascinated by new drugs that could replace the U.S. supply of heroin. Instant buddy. And then he said, I've got an article I want you to read. Look at this drug. And it was the first time I've ever heard the name fentanyl. Oh shit. This is going to get interesting.
Coming up on The Godfather of Fentanyl. George Eric Marquardt makes a discovery that will make the mass production of street fentanyl possible for the first time ever.
Suddenly, there was a heavy smoke that poured from the neck of the flask, and I held it up to the light, and I could just get a glint of crystals. Beautiful white crystals.
and law enforcement is about to find themselves in a race against the clock to stop it.
We're gonna start fucking blanketing the East Coast with fentanyl. Here we go.